Hi there, you're listening to Arcane Frequencies. Today's show asks the question, is there a place for orbs in the paranormal field? I'm Andy.
And I'm Mary.
So the structure of the show is we start off with just asking a few questions, just yes, no.
Okay.
Yeah, so you only can answer yes or no.
Okay, let's go.
Mary, is the terminology for orbs correct?
Controversial, but no.
Are all orbs dust?
No.
Do you think orbs can be paranormal?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a way to investigate an orb?
I think there is, yes.
Need to dig into that one in a bit. And then the big question, is it possible to prove an orb is paranormal?
Possibly, maybe. I know that's not a yes or no.
This is the first time we've done this and you're already cheating.
I know, but there's definitely more to it.
Maybe. Okay, you're going to expand on that a little bit then?
Yes, indeed. There's lots to explore on this topic, but how would you describe what an orb is?
When we're talking about orbs, what we're really discussing here, I think, is the phenomenon of people recording small blobs of light, either on video or still photography. And that still photography can be analog photography or it can be digital. And that blob of light not having an obvious source within the photo. So an unexplained light phenomena which is caught on some sort of media. Does that sound good to you? Does that cover the orb phenomena for you?
Yes, I agree, Andy. I think that covers it very well, actually. For me, I agree it's light or energy that is seen with either your own eyes or on footage. And it's believed to be part of a celestial being, or as we know it, a spirit.
Okay, so let's cycle back then. Let's go into some in depth with the your first answer is interesting. So you don't think that the terminology of orb actually is correct or best fits the phenomena?
Definition of an orb is a spherical body, and I think we see lots of different types of light anomalies. Not always orbs. We see lights, we see mists, we see lines of lights. So there's lots of different types of light anomaly phenomena. We've seen square lights, we've seen rectangular lights, even triangular lights. So is it fair to class an orb as a light anomaly, or do we think that there are different types of light anomalies out there, not just an orb? So probably don't want to reinvent the wheel, but I think it would be important for us to see whether it can be broken down into different terminology. So maybe not always an orb. If you see a ball of light, you might want to define that in a different way.
That's interesting. So I've always thought it's an odd word to pick, orb, because that does indicate a sphere. Where when you're looking at these light anomalies on film, you're seeing a disc, a circle of some type. There's no way of indicating that there's any sort of third dimension to that. So how could that actually be an orb without imbuing that with some sort of explanation of like it's a ball of energy that you're getting a photo of? But the evidence you've got is that 2D representation. It's a circle. You'd only ever tell if it was a ball of energy if you had another source of information, like you'd seen it being a ball passing down a corridor, which is, I mean, there's a lot of reports of people seeing balls of energy moving around, but perhaps that is being conjoined with this phenomena of light anomalies on film, which then end up 2D.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I've seen a white light go across a ceiling at Fort Widley. But again, I couldn't say whether that was spherical or 3D. I mean, it certainly looked very flat to me. We've also captured what could be said is orbs on cameras. We use cameras with detachable IR sources. So we don't tend to get the dust contamination, but we definitely have captured orbs or light anomalies on camera.
Absolutely, I'd agree. I've seen light anomalies in with my eyes, and on 2 occasions caught on camera at the same time. But when I saw them, they were opaque circles of light passing in front of other objects. To me, I saw no dimension to those at all. But that's not to say that hasn't been witnessed. It's just that I've got no experience of it. So what we're going to call them then, if we're not calling them orbs? We call them light anomalies?
Yeah, haven't really thought that far ahead, but maybe just an anomaly.
Yeah. Should we, though, just pander to kind of popular culture here and just call them orbs for the rest of the episode, just to make it easier to define? Even if they're not technically orbs, they're orbs now.
Yes, absolutely. Don't want to reinvent the wheel, so yeah, let's go with that for now.
No, it's good shorthand. So what else we talked about there was what are they if they're not dust? Which I agree with this, the sentiment that they're definitely not all dust. There are lots of other naturalistic sources for these anomalies on film, which is not always dust. There are a couple of different photographic studies. So there was a Nikon report and a Fuji report into when people were seeing these things on their new cameras, and they were saying, I'm seeing these blobs of white on my photos. I've just spent a fortune on my camera. Where's it come from? They looked at it and said that any object within 3 to 4 inches of the camera, which can reflect back light from your flash or light source, would produce these flares. It's called backscatter, where the light that's projecting forward gets reflected back at the camera. And because it's so close to the camera, it's blurred because it's outside the camera's focal length. So you're just seeing a blur of a point of light on the film or the digital photography. And there can be lots of things. So apart from dust, you can have pollen, insects, snow, rain, bits of hair, bits of ash, I think it's small particulates.
Cobwebs.
Cobwebs is a big one now. I see a lot of videos that get posted online, and you see these strands of light wafting around, and you're thinking, that's a cobweb. And there's a spider on the end of it. So that waft of light with a blob is just a spider getting blown around in the wind.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of footage where somebody believes that it's something paranormal when it looks like a cobweb. And unless you've reviewed a lot of footage, I can see how it can be easily mistaken for something paranormal. But we have seen light anomalies that look cobwebby.
Yeah. So you're saying orbs can be paranormal, but there is a lot of discounting work to be done first.
Yeah, absolutely. It's easy for the untrained eye to mistake dust, bugs, or cobwebs for something paranormal. But the best way to try and prove it is to debunk or discount first, then ask if anything else was happening at the same time.
Yeah. An interesting thing I read was the distance between the light source and the camera's lens is a big factor here. So you tend to see more these days because cameras tend to be quite tiny, and then the light source is quite close to where the lens is, sometimes within an inch of where the lens is. Whereas before, you'd have a camera, and then off to the side, sometimes like a foot away from it, you'd have this big arm, and then you'd have a light on there, or the flash was a separate unit. And because of that, you're not seeing the same angle of light between the camera lens and the light source. So therefore, it's not reflecting back at the lens. It's only because the light source is so close to the lens that it's bouncing straight back to where the lens is.
So camera positioning and IR positioning is important then?
Yeah. Whereas you look at, like, say, a security camera, where it's got the camera in the middle and a ring of lights around it, they're literally next to each other. So any light coming up from that IR and bouncing off something is going to go straight back into the lens. So saying that, so you've got a good video or a photo, which I think are different things as well. I think when you have a video, you've got no flash photography that's causing that. It's not a single instant. It would be a constant light source, which can be, like you said, when you're using an IR illuminator next to a camera, that's the constant light source. Or sometimes other people's IR illuminators who are standing behind you, for example. But you've got that piece of footage and you've got that orb. How can you investigate that?
For investigation, I think there's two thoughts for me. If you've already had an investigation, you've captured an orb on the camera, when you're reviewing, is there anything else happening at the same time? So was someone feeling touched, or did you capture an EVP? Was there a disembodied voice? Because I think having the orb at the same time as other evidence is a really good way of validating an orb or a light anomaly, and that will just help for the credibility. The second part, and this is if you see an orb in real time, something I'd really like to do, I haven't done it as yet, but I'd like to obtain a light density sensor, because I think that would also validate that if you had an orb or a light move in the room, then you could measure the light density in that area. You could see whether any of the results change, and I think that could be a really good indicator to add to the validation of if there was an orb in the room.
So like it builds up that case for it being paranormal by having more evidence to support it, in effect. Yeah,
I'd also like to find a way of sort of logging orbs on the database, because again, I think sort of just having that log for them would again help with credibility. And who knows, with that being on the database, who knows what patterns you might be able to see over time. We've seen it with other areas that we've explored, and who knows, we might be able to see a pattern.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good way, again, of building up that case for the orb being paranormal, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in the light density sensor. I've had experience at Fulford Manor where Dan was sat across the other side of the room and I couldn't see him. He then felt bad, needed to leave the room, and actually I saw a light follow him through the door. And that would be a really good example of using a light density sensor.
That's true enough. I've had that as well. I walked into a room with some cameras which had IR eliminators, and with the cameras and my eyes I could not see the back of the room. It was dark until I set the cameras down, and then suddenly it was there. And you can understand that with my eyes adjusting to it, but the camera also just changed as well. We could see the back of the room and the light level hadn't changed on it whatsoever.
What about you, Andy? Would there be any ways that you would try and investigate an orb?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So if it's something which is in the past, I think kind of trying to go back to the location and understand the environment a bit better with that hindsight of something occurred there is really, really valuable. So going back to the same spot, trying to recreate the same footage, sometimes can tell you things like there is cobwebs dangling from the ceiling, or there is that security light which is just off camera, but it's enough there to cast a lens flare on the camera itself, and then when you move the camera around it, you pick up that lens flare. Revisiting and recreating, I think, is a good way to even check something you previously caught, even if you didn't see it at the time, because you can learn from the environment more. Sometimes it doesn't help at all, and you can't recreate anything, and you're left with a feeling like, well, it's none of those things, and you still don't really know what it is. As you said, trying to add to, at the time of capture, is to build up a case for something being paranormal. That's the way to go. And for me, trying to see other types of data, so other changes in the environment or other things people have experienced at that time, that is useful to try and capture those things that were happening at the same time as that anomaly was caught. Just like most paranormal occurrences, having other source of data to support them, that's the most valuable way of trying to prove it. Though there's some things you can do to try and improve your chances of proving something's paranormal by something you set up. So one experiment I've tried a couple of times, but it's not something I routinely do, and I really want to, is when you film 3D photography, you tend to, in the old days anyway, you tend to have two cameras that are then aligned so they have a specific focal point in front of them, and that's how then you got the left eye and right eye views for 3D movies. If you do the same thing when you're investigating, anything you catch on one camera should come on the other camera as well. But if there was a speck of dirt or a bug with the IR from one camera reflecting it back to itself, that then shouldn't appear on the other camera because it's using a different illuminator or the same illuminator but with a different angle. By just having twin sensors, so twin cameras of some sort, pointing towards the same place, if you're not capturing it on both, it wasn't really there.
So this really would be where camera positioning is really important to an investigation.
Yeah, capturing specifically, because it does seem really directional and situational.
That is interesting.
It would tell you an awful lot. It would have to be self-illuminating, so the light would have to come from whatever activity was occurring at that point in space, and you'd then pick that up on both the cameras.
Well, we definitely have to try that then. I'll add it to the list.
There you go. Add it to the list.
Writing it down now.
And might come back and let you know if we've picked anything up from that, I think. So I wanted to touch as well a little bit on if we've done all that. So like we've set up this perfect scenario where we've got multiple cameras pointing in nearly the same direction, and we picked up that light. What on earth can it be? What can it represent? Is it still natural, or is it paranormal? If we had this blob of energy in the air, how can we then say that is linked to something spiritual, in effect, something that's not a physics process that we know and understand? Because I was researching plasma to try and understand some of the reasons why you have light appear from nowhere, and it's surprisingly easy to create plasma in the real world, in the day-to-day world. When you light a match, the fire around that match is a plasma. It's just where you have some sort of gas, so like the air itself, lose some electrons, and that then generates this burst of light by the gas turning from a gas to a plasma. And the interesting thing about that is it doesn't need to actually always be heat. You don't have to have a match to do it. If you compress things, if there's some sort of force which is squashing that air enough, it also turns into a plasma.
That's intriguing.
Yeah, and the reason I was looking into that as well was I was really interested in these mountain lights that people see, where there are kind of balls of light that appear around mountains. And generally they say these are UAPs, they're alien craft. But if you think of the pressures inside those mountains with the rocks all pressing together, there's no reason that couldn't be just balls of super compressed air which has just turned into a plasma.
That is interesting. I've had a theory where I've seen orbs, and quite often you would get knocks at the same time. And I'm wondering if when an orb passes through some material or enters a room, we've quite often seen the air pressure change, and we know that air pressure could be a factor. So I'm wondering if there could be some connection between orbs entering the room, the air pressure, and I wonder if that knock isn't a knock as we would understand it. It's possibly the sound barrier breaking. I know that could be quite astounding, but if they're compressing the air, could that knocking sound be part of the sound barrier break?
Yeah, that makes sense. The downside of initially I thought plasma was like, if that occurred, if a tiny few particles of air became plasma and became this dot of light, you'd see it. But looking deep into it's not always the case, because that wavelength of the light that it generates changes depending on the situations it occurs. So you could actually have these plasmas which have a wavelength in the IR and the UV as well. The UV seems to be more popular actually, that's more likely to happen because it's a higher frequency, which means you wouldn't see it, but your full spectrum night vision camera would, and it would see this bright blob of light appearing. You wouldn't see the thing, and you go back to it, and it would be there, and it'd be emitting the light. So again, that would show up on two cameras, and it would sort of be naturalistic because it's a process we understand, but the cause of it occurring, that's then the mystery.
Another theory that I've had is where do orbs sit on the light spectrum? So are they on the UV spectrum or are they on the IR spectrum? I've seen occurrences on both from other people's evidence, but it did spark the the theory of where do they sit on the light spectrum.
Got a lot of theories recently.
Indeed, I've been watching a lot of shows.
One thing we can also add, though, is when plasma is created, it generates a lot of ions. So it generates a lot of charged energy from doing that transition. And ions are definitely something we can record and then see if we record that on a data log, for example, the current ionic energy in the air, if any spikes or changes in that occur at the same time as people capture an orb, then that would be a really good indicator that it was a plasma base.
Oh, that would be really good to do. We'll add that one to the list.
We've got, have a little chat and we end up with a list of things to do.
It'd be really good to add it to the database, though. And I think it would help validity of proving orb.
Exactly. Builds up that case again, doesn't it? I think each time you have some sort of paranormal occurrence, the more data and the more information you have about that, the better the case is for it being paranormal, because it's far easier to prove something is natural than it is to prove it is paranormal. It's very tempting with the subject of orbs to become quite polar with it. So either you believe none of them are right or all of them are right. But I kind of feel like I think both of us are very much sitting in that middle space where kind of both think there's something to it, but there needs to be more work on it to really understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely think finding a way to measure it and adding it to a database is definitely the way forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we can let people know that this is how we did it, and then they can try and replicate it as well. And then maybe we move a bit further forward with it rather than just saying it's not or it is, and then it really being your opinion as opposed to being anything scientific.
Okay, I've written it down and added it to the list.
Yeah, okay, there's plenty of things for us to get on with then.
It's a very long list.
Yeah, I thought we were going to rule this one out quite quickly, but it seems to be a bit of a deep subject, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'll be interested to get back into the reviewing and see what the results are.
See if there's any correlation between other things at the same time, and let the data do all the talking.
Yeah, and I just need to make sure that we capture as many different points as we can on the database, rather than it just being a singular photo.
Yeah, I don't think it generally helps further the understanding of that when people just share photos either and then say, what do you think of this? Do you think it's an orb or not? I mean, I get quite a few of those when I get sent a picture and say, this is an orb. And the reason it's an orb is because I looked into it and I can pick out a face. I can see some eyes in there. And that means it's definitely paranormal. And for me, it might be a great photo. It might be a perfect face. It might look the exact dead spit of Keith Chegwin in this orb. But to me, there's still only one data point. That doesn't really tell you much about what happened there. Okay, so that's that controversial topic touched.
Yes, nothing like starting with a big bang. Oh no, wait, that's a different show.
Well, thanks for listening to Arcane Frequencies. We're available on lots of places. So we're on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, and Spreaker. You can also catch our latest episodes. They are embedded in arcanefrequencies.co.uk. We actually cover a lot of different topics. In fact, this one was suggested by someone. And if you have a suggestion on what you'd like us to discuss and get a deep dive into, you just email contact@arcanefrequencies.co.uk, then maybe that'll be an interesting show for us to do. We're aiming for about once a month with these podcasts. So if you subscribe to us on one of your favourite podcast vendors of choice, then hopefully we'll pop up and you can join in.
Thanks for listening. This is Mary and Andy signing out. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
Thanks for listening.